London.
Watch Dogs Legion is the third game in Ubisoft's hacking-focused open-world franchise, and it offers the series' most ambitious gameplay concept yet, ditching the idea of a central protagonist in favour of a new system that allows you to recruit and play as any NPC you see in the environment. Watch Dogs Legion was one of the games I was most anticipating in 2020, as I really like the Watch Dogs franchise. I particularly loved Watch Dogs 2 and thought that it was a huge step forward from the first game. So the idea of the franchise taking another leap forward with Legion's innovative new gameplay concept had me very excited. Unfortunately, I found myself pretty underwhelmed by Watch Dogs Legion. The more I played of the game, the less I enjoyed it. While the idea of controlling any NPC is cool in theory, in practice the novelty quickly wore off for me. Too many of the NPCs feel almost exactly the same to play as, and the lack of a real protagonist really ended up hurting the immersion for me, as I just wasn't that invested in any of the characters I recruited, as they all felt somewhat disposable. This was particularly disappointing as I found Marcus to be such a likeable protagonist in Watch Dogs 2. Overall, I feel like Watch Dogs Legion is crushed under its own ambitions in a lot of ways. While it introduces a major new gameplay concept to the series, it also fails to evolve the core gameplay in any meaningful way. Overall, Legion feels like a noticeable step down in quality from Watch Dogs 2. Let's start with what Watch Dogs Legion does right, because there are some aspects of the game that I genuinely really liked. The main story is one of the high points of Legion for me. Legion's story begins with a bombing occurring in London and the central hacking group DedSec being wrongly blamed for it. This leads to London being overtaken by a private security firm called Albion, who turn London into a surveillance state where citizens' freedoms are heavily restricted and their every action is monitored, with your job being to free London from Albion's rule. While I was underwhelmed by the playable characters of Legion, I was surprised by how compelling I found the antagonists. Albion's CEO, Nigel Cass, and crime boss Mary Kelly both make incredibly sinister and interesting villains. While the overarching story does touch on some familiar plot beats and themes, it's still well told and throws in just enough twists and turns to remain engaging the whole way through. The story also goes to some extremely dark places at points that I wasn't expecting. I'd also be remiss to not give a shout out to the artificial intelligence Bagley, who's constantly in your ear throughout Legion. He frequently chimes in on situations with snarky remarks, and the dry humour he provides offers some much welcomed levity to Legion. The strongest element of Watch Dogs Legion is its world. When I first booted the game up, I spent a good few hours just exploring London and seeing the sights, and I had a really good time doing so. London is the perfect setting for an open world game, but it's also a setting that we don't see all that often in games. Legion's map is filled with real-world landmarks that are faithfully recreated, and countless small distractions to see along the way as you make your way from point to point in the game. When it comes to the gameplay of Watch Dogs Legion, I have extremely mixed feelings. I still love hacking objects in the environment to solve puzzles and get the upper hand on enemies, but Legion's mission design is so repetitive that it's difficult to not become fatigued with it. A huge amount of the missions in Legion boil down to sneaking into an area riddled with enemies, hacking a device, and then fending off enemies until the hack is complete. The gameplay also feels far more restrictive with how it lets you tackle these missions than Watch Dogs 2 did. In Watch Dogs 2, I approached a lot of missions by sending in a remote-controlled device and completing the tasks without ever physically entering the area, but Legion has so many points that require physical contact to hack that this is rarely an option anymore. I also felt like Legion was forcing me into combat far more frequently than Watch Dogs 2, which can be irritating, because while the gunplay in Legion is competent, it's definitely not the strongest aspect of the game. You can mix combat up a bit with the unique gadgets that certain recruits have. For example, one of my recruits was a spy, whose watch allowed him to disable the guns of enemies in the area, while another recruit had the ability to send swarms of robotic bees to torment his enemies. While these abilities add a little more flair to the combat in Legion, the vast majority of people you encounter have practically identical movesets. Because Legion relies so heavily on its core gimmick of recruiting different people to play as, it would have been nice to see the idea taken further by adding more variety to these characters through a larger selection of pros and cons for different recruits. When it comes to performance and polish, Legion is sloppy in quite a few areas. A lot of the NPC's character models look bad, and their animations can be quite janky. This is the major downside to having randomly generated characters, as they'll never look as good as normal character models that are meticulously designed by developers. There are also performance issues like pop-in when you're flying around on a drone, and the game randomly crashed on me countless times. Watch Dogs Legion is also missing some small quality of life features. I really wish there was a way to create a playlist of music to listen to in-game, rather than having to just listen to whatever songs are playing on the radio at any given time. This is something that Saints Row the Third let you do almost a decade ago, so it's disappointing to see it missing here. I usually love this kind of open world game. As a completionist, I'm a sucker for clearing out a map and completing all the side content in my pursuit of the Platinum Trophy, so it says something that after finishing Legion, I had no desire to boot the game up again, which is really disappointing because I had a great time platinuming Watch Dogs 2. While I don't think Legion is a bad game by any means, I also don't think it's a particularly great one, which makes it impossible to recommend picking up in such a crowded holiday season for games. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this review, make sure to like and subscribe for more reviews, including my first batch of PS5 game reviews.